2018. And they're going through a whole series with us. And with that crowd, I have a signal, what do you call it? A calling card? I don't know what you call it. Call it something like this, but it's TWCA, the way of Christ and his apostles. So you just go like this. That's right. All right. So in this session, in this last one,
the exciting part.
Jeff, you got to not only do you have to put it on, you got to put it on your head. It's not even on. No, it's not even on your head. It's hanging down right there. We have to be patient with Jeff because this is his first time speaking in front of others. This is his first time speaking, so
I thought you were going to go after the old part. Why is my mic not on? Testing. Okay, good. You said what?
You said what? So in the first session and in this session...
Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to do. Hold on a second. He tells you about this TWCA, that nobody can remember that acronym, right? The cool thing is, what is it? AP3 Mafia. Oh, we shouldn't tell people that, should we? We got the 13 guys and come over afterwards to my lounge, and Michael and I are there with them. We spent another 3 hours, and so we named it the AP, Apostolic Team 3, third generation. APM 3. Yeah, all right. I never get it right. Acronyms are hard. I got kind of a dyslexia of ideas. So it's just what is it? APM?
APM 3 is what it's called.
Mafia 3, yeah.
Third gen. That, by the way, if you get into a group conversation with the third gen, just be ready to, they send you guys send 28 text messages. That ain't cool.
Yeah, so what do you like right. better? What he emphasized of TWCA or the APM 3 Mafia? It's better, right?
Yes.
Yeah, see?
All right. With that great introduction, we're intentionally not trying to make a formal presentation, by the way, in case you didn't notice. We're not just being cavalier for the sake of being cavalier. We're showing you the depth of just who we are. This is who we are. This is very serious things that we're talking about, but we're having fun. This is when we're in your sweet spot of what God wants you to do. It's just plain fun, and you feel fulfilled. So what you gather from this is this is just who we are. We're not trying to give you a polished presentation. We're not trying to tell you we got it all put together. We're not telling you that. What we're telling you is we wrestle with this stuff. There's a seriousness to it. We're taking the first generation, the second generation, and the third generation through this. And it's a battle to go up the curve, but we're having fun. This is fun. We should be having fun. We should be laughing, and we should be crying together. So, one other point of introduction yet as well. This is the second session, and we'll be talking about grand and master strategies here and some of the plans for the next year. What I failed to tell you an hour ago was these two sessions are really what we call from an apostolic view. And what we mean by apostolic view, the word apostolic, all we mean by it, and overly simplistic, by that lexicon, by that word, all we mean is sent out. There's a bunch of different definitions everyone could come up with perhaps that are floating around in the world. All we mean is there's a set of leaders that are called out to the world and out to different places. It may be out just of this city to a different city over there. But in our case, it's out. And so when we say apostolic view, what we mean is think of a ship and there's a crow's nest on top, and you can see something out there. You can see it because you're up in the crow's nest, because maybe the way you're wired or the way you are, the way God's put you in, you can see that there's land up there. And so you're squinting, you're looking through the fog, you're trying to get an apostolic view. And so what Jeff and I are doing in the last session and in this session, we're trying to give you all an apostolic view, a peek into what it looks like on the top of the crow's nest to see Paradigm Land way up there. That's what we're doing. Tomorrow we're going to do apostolic shaping, where we're providing some shape to the thing. But that's what we will need you to have in your head. So I think that's all I wanted to say about that apostolic view.
Yeah, I think also I could add that it's sort of like it's not just philosophical by any means, but it sets the broad framework, and then our specific strategies that are also global. And really excited about this Global Center for Master Craftsmen and how that's going to empower everything. That's Friday morning, and tomorrow we're going to look at the a lot more intensely at the Mastering the Scriptures and several other resources. But the idea is to this broad framework here, that like what I'm going to give you now, I'm going to skim through it as well, and we'll make the slides available. And I was thinking afterwards, maybe since it's the third time, I should maybe do a little 5-page paper or something of what we mean by emerging Christianity, shaping emerging Christianity, or Christendom, and by the grand strategy. Because now we have the capacity to fill that in. So some of the story is designed to show you also not only what the future is, but how we've gotten to this particular point. And then I think you're going to be pretty excited about the next 2 days of some things that are going to a lot higher level than what they were before.
Yeah. So, do we need to do any introduction of the grand strategy before we get into it, Jeff?
I don't think so. The couple slides I threw up front builds towards what yours would be. So.
Towards the master strategy, because what you'll hear from us is at the center of who we are is Christ's grand strategy, which is right out of Ephesians, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And so that's at the center, Christ's strategy, Christ. And where in the world did you come up with Christ's grand strategy? Well, if you look at the words in Ephesians, we'll show you how the range of the meanings of those words is strategy and grand strategy. Now, when you're trying to get back to Christ's grand strategy, which is the fulfillment of the Great Commission, or another way to say it is, what does it mean to follow Jesus? It means to follow his plan, follow his strategy, follow his grand strategy, and all the patterns that entail it. So, once you understand that, then as humans, we have a role to play. And in this case, we have a grand strategy and a master global strategy, which is about execution of it. So that's just quick orientation about, again, from an apostolic view, how you need to be understanding those terms.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that. In fact, let me add to that a little bit too, because I'm going right into the grand strategy and Christendom idea. What Michael's talking about there in Ephesians 3, Paul says, I've been given a twofold job description to preach the gospel to the Gentiles, which that's the whole mission framework taken out to the Gentiles, and to bring to light what is the administration of the mystery, the church. The word administration comes from two words, oikonomia, and it means house order, but in that context, it really does mean grand strategy. In other words, he's got a plan. In other words, Paul's to take the gospel to the Gentiles and make really clear what's not been clear in the past, mystery.
It was a mystery.
Really clear Christ's plan, that is the church. So he has a grand strategy. And so when you go to the book of Acts and you see that Christ says, take the gospel to the nations, but he says, wait a minute until the Spirit comes, but not just the Spirit, but the Spirit's going to give you instructions. So actually, Acts becomes the catechetical framework for that plan. And then you intersperse Paul's letters and the fact that he's been given that job description. And so there is a grand strategy, and there's a framework for it. So when we're talking about these different pieces like civilization and then global city structure. Well, that's very much related to Paul's strategy of he went to strategic cities in the beginning of that. So I didn't take time, to tie those pieces in, but that's exactly right. We're not just pulling this out of the air. We're not pulling paradigms out of the air either, because that word is actually used for the Old Testament, illustrating stuff in the Word, same Greek word that fits into the whole pattern and strategy that's unfolding.
Some of these things, understand that some of these things we're talking about, like Christ's grand strategy, when you're in a different paradigm of understanding, those items are hiding in plain sight. They are hiding right in front of us, because you don't think about it that way. You think about it as a building and as a service, an event that you have to put on as a Christian. And so you don't think about it, and you think, so again, you have to understand a lot of these things hide in plain sight. They're there, but you can't see them. Grand strategy is a perfect example of that.
The illustration is probably not needed, but because most of you have been here for, so I don't think I'm going to give it. I may use it later.
Okay, great.
It's a good illustration.
Good. We look forward to it with great anticipation.
Shall I go?
Did you hear me with the sarcasm? 3 of you did. Thank you.
You don't have to worry about laughing, though, because he'll tell you if what he's been talking about was a joke, and then you can laugh, at least as far as the emerging Christendom, mapping, shaping the progress of the gospel in the 21st century. Those are very important concepts, because we're not saying, but they can sound arrogant as well, but the shaping means that we're putting some concrete things in place that we think are rooted deeply into the first 300 years of the early church, but obviously particularly in the New Testament, in the Antiochian tradition, that have been lost for a long period of time. And so we're not just shaping things in a vacuum. What we're doing is we're saying there was a shape that's supposed to be around every generation, and we've gotten further and further away from it. And so we're actually feeling like now, if we just had some ideas and God wasn't really opening major doors, we wouldn't make that kind of statement. But all across the global south, and I can't talk about one of the countries, obviously, but major responses of strategic movements all across the global south, and all coming together around this framework that we're given of Christ's grand strategy as given to us by Paul, and the traditioning of Paul then for future generations that should happen within the framework of the Acts pattern, which is why at the end of each one of Michael's encyclical, or in his global dialogues, is patterned after Acts. So that's what we're doing there. Grand strategy is my task. Part 1, grand strategy, and then Michael has a set on strategy systems. And I'm going to present mine very fast, but standing here, and then we're going to, Michael's going to work the strategy systems in while we're just sitting together on it. And again, some of this isn't new. This is a third version of these slides. And even the things that we're sharing in the strategy systems are not new, but we've gotten to the point now where they're just really clear. It's like particularly finishing all the way through Paul's corpus, in depth in mastering the scriptures, or his early, middle, and later letters, has crystallized things in such a way that we've even got our labeling. It's kind of like our lexicon of the paradigm is becoming clear, and the systems, I believe, are really going to. I'm not going to do anything here. One of the key bodies of work. This is Philip Jenkins, The Next Christendom and the New Faces of Christianity. He's got a whole collection, The Lost History, 1,000-Year Golden Age of the the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, and how it died. But he's probably almost the most famous person in demonstrating the massive shift from the north to the south. In North America, in the last decade, from a Pew Trust, we lost another 10 million from our churches. And we're clearly in a post-Christian culture. That's what that small Catholic book is, From Christendom to Apostolic Age. In other words, we're moving from Christendom as it's dying in the West back to the Apostolic Age of the first 300 years. But we got to go forward into the 21st century. And what Jenkins does is shows the massive growth that has taken place, really mostly since 1970. And the other work that's very important is the rise of network Christianity. The fastest growing movement in Christianity, both in the West and in the global South, is now led by a network of dynamic, independent religious entrepreneurs, often referred to as apostles. And in Global Pentecostalism, the encyclical, I take you through that whole journey so you understand what we're meaning by those terms. Now, this is at Global Pentecostalism and the Spirit, the progress of the gospel in the 21st century. So kind of when we say shaping the next Christendom, what we really mean is there is a shape that is emerging, and we want to make sure that we put around it and give tools for networks to be able to go full steam in the 21st century based on the way of Christ and the apostles in those first 300 years. The essence of the idea, a new global church is emerging out of global Pentecostalism in the global South, just as it did after the first 300 years of the early church, which is based on, just as it did after the in the first 300 years. That's our key statement. I ought to get it right. Which was based on the way of Christ and the apostles with the potential of high impact on cities and cultures globally. But our networks must be carefully shaped around Christ's grand strategy as unfolded in Acts as a global network of networks. Some call this emerging Christendom and the rise of network Christianity. So we're not creating these terms. They're terms there's probably been 6-8 scholarly books in the last 6-8 years, actually, that are on the global Pentecostalism and the emergence of Christianity, because now we're able to see a lot of the shape that has unfolded. And in a couple of the biggest countries in the world, you can figure that out, we got 75% of the large-scale movements move in this direction with us. A little bit of history. I did this. You can't read it, but again, these will be available. But this was called our Build Strategic Intent, 1990 to 210. To build strategic intent, there was a Harvard Business Review article on how the Japanese use strategic intent, where it's not a detailed plan, but it's a intention with enough clarity that you can follow it in an entrepreneurial fashion early on in a paradigm curve. So that was the term I used before grand strategy. So that was 1990 to 210, and you can see it follows the same idea of established churches, church-based resource centers, and an international network. So that was the framework that we built on. Then a second thing was design of the Center for CBTE in 1995, and then eventually linked and getting things clear with the first century church from simple church to complex network. And so then we created in 95 the Center for Church-Based Theological Education with the view of our model and prototype being pretty focused and pretty pure at the heart of it, but creating a framework so people could create their own systems and pathways within it. And now what we'll be talking about in Friday extensively is what we're calling the Global Center for Master Craftsman MAP, Master Craftsman Apprenticeships and Portfolio. And I actually should have it up here, the original MAP that we started, Ministry Apprenticeship Program in 1972, and Michael reached back into that terminology. He reached back into the Center for Church-Based Theological Education to put to put the vision together in a way that very much more is reflected out of a Paul-Timothy relationship in biblical theology. So what we've done in the last few years is created a grand strategy. If you were to see this booklet, it's about 35 pages. It's got a global grand strategy, and then civilization master strategies, and then partner master strategies. So when we also say grand strategies, that's a concept that's been around for a long time. Down through the centuries, this book is Grand Strategies, looking at it in Greece and Rome. The two of the books, one book I have is The Grand Strategy of the Roman Empire, from the 1st century AD to the 3rd. There's a strategy behind it. Roman road, everything. And so when that strategy's in place, when any strategy's in place, and it gets strong, it's a powerful movement tool. Another one is Grand Strategy of the Byzantine Empire. This one by Brands, What is a Good Grand Strategy? Sets forth 10 basic suggestions developing a grand strategy. The number 2 suggestion is start with the first principles. Isn't that interesting? And then another one that has shaped our government a lot, here in the U.S., Grand Strategy Theory in Practice, Grand Strategy in Practice and Theory. 3 guiding principles for developing. You rebuild foundations of authority. That's what we're doing in the core body of work. First principles, mastering the scriptures, and the life development work. The second is exercising global leadership to restrain sources of disorder. And that's where we actually set out initiatives ourselves, such as our city initiative in North America, or our global city initiative. Another one is form alliances and partnerships with others that can fit what they're doing in the context of this paradigm. It's pretty exciting when you start seeing that begin to happen. So the grand strategy involves shaping the next Christendom, the next paradigm of Christianity around way of Christ and the apostles, focused on a return to the first 300 years of the early church, which was called the Antioch tradition, shaped around the expansion of churches in the global south in the 21st century. Now we have 3 mega strategies that shape our grand strategy. One is the emerging order of civilizations. Samuel Huntington, in his book, The Clash of Civilizations and World Order, on the other side of the end of the Cold War, 1989, he had an article in Foreign Affairs first, and then 4 years later came out with a book, but right away in 88, 89, he came out with the article, and he said after the wall comes down and after the East-West conflicts break, everything isn't just focused on that. The world's going to settle back into 9 civilizations, which was very prophetic in how that happened. If you understand China, well, I can't go into too much stuff. He identifies these 9 civilizations and their pathways for church planting movements in our mind. A second is global cities. Another significant identifiable pattern emerging in globalization. In other words, that first one is a pattern of globalization today. A second identifiable pattern in globalization is the globalization and world cities movement. The identification, categorization, and charting of global cities as global networks of linked cities. One of the key spokespersons is Saskia Sassen in her 2 works, The Global City, New York, London, Tokyo, and Global Networks Linked Cities. And so the cities of the world are mapped. Alpha, beta, gamma. Alpha A, alpha A plus, alpha minus. That's 3 categories. So there's 9 categories. And the cities are mapped that way. Do you know that China has mapped their cities? There are, what is it? There are 200 cities. They're all mapped in different tiers, but there's 200 cities by 2030 that'll be over 1 million. So that maps any kind of strategy. They understand that kind of work. So the global city map, we can actually look around the world and say these are the top strategic 60 cities in the world, because they measure that by what cities build off them. That happens in your civilization. So if you're in India, what are your strategic cities? Well, your political center is New Delhi, your commerce center is Mumbai, and then you've got Kolkata, you've got Chennai, Hyderabad, and Bangalore. And you got those 6, and they're the anchors. Everything builds out from that, which means if you're doing some kind of city initiative, you want your groups that are in that city working together in a way that it will then ripple on out to the cities that draw on it and out to the towns and villages. And then global tribes. Kotkin, in his book Tribes, How Race, Religion, and Identity Determine Success in the New Global Economy. He identifies 3 elements that that contribute to the powerful global networks that transcend country boundaries: ethnic identity, global network, and a passion for technology. These tribes provide outstanding opportunities for powerful diaspora-based church planting movements. And we don't have time to go back here now, but we took the series that we're working on, and there's Paul's strategy, which relates to a combination of civilization and key cities. You're working on down to the Petrine epistles, and you're dealing with the diaspora. So you begin to get a set of principles, and then you get down to small networks in John. And you begin to see that you're given a lot of clues into mapping from the initial instructions in Acts, and global tribes as part of it. Steve Gallagher's done a terrific job of working with Albania and then starting to trace the diaspora, different parts of the world. And some of that, of course, led to, Kosovo, and we got a lot of illustrations. Chadwick, you're doing that right now with some diaspora spread. Indian diaspora spread all over the place. Your South Africa, your London, all across the United States. So out of the base of the cities, base of the civilization, then comes the cities internally, and then comes the diaspora. And we got examples of that emerging all around the world. It's something in all 9 civilizations. The 20-year or 30-year conversation that will be 45. Paradigm papers are started in the initial writings in 88 to 203, encyclicals 209 to 219, and now the white papers and the dialogues. The white papers go back to the paradigm itself in the paradigm papers, looks at the development, the resources that are there and their roots, and the enterprises that are there and their roots, and then looks at the next 30 years. So creating that continuity. And the global dialogues, as Michael's working on scaling these things, build primarily off of the encyclicals. And right now there's, I think we'll see 2 or 3 global dialogues come out of each encyclical as he unfolds those, whereas the white papers will stick like the paradigm papers originally. And then just there is good research, because we're going to be challenging you. We're going to be challenging you to be working on a global, a master strategy, even a grand strategy related to a civilization that interacts with our grand strategy, but primarily master strategies that are civilization-wide that include the cities and the diaspora. Well, there's 3 tremendous bodies of research. One is, because we're in big data now, are key trends identifying the shaping of Christianity. So 1, if we got the biblical shape, 2, we got churches, networks all across the global south that are saying, we agree with that, we want to go with you in this shaping. And then you've got tremendous data available to see where the Spirit's working and how it's unfolding. That's all part of what needs to take place in the next 30 years. And there are 3 sets. The Western theological institutions created the World Encyclopedia, World Christian Encyclopedia, an atlas to global Christianity, tremendous tools. This was just updated. And then Christianity in Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, East, so on. These are like a fortune. It's like $3,000 for the whole thing. Then you have the global apostolic, the Western missionary enterprise. You may have heard of the Future of the Global Church, Operation World. Operation China is an amazing thing. It traces down 400 ethnic groups, one page at a time, showing you where the growth is, how many are Christians, very, very clear stuff. And then the last one, most evangelicals don't see it, but global Pentecostal data. The encyclopedia, look at that, Encyclopedia of Christianity in the Global South. Volume 1, or Global Renewal, then is 4 volumes. So just like out of this, out of the encyclopedia, comes these, that same pattern here on global Pentecostalism. Here is the encyclopedia, and then here's the volumes extended out of that in each part of the world. Okay, so what do we mean by mapping and shaping? You will map your own network or networks of networks within a civilization, mapping civilization-wide networking to fit with the global grand strategy that you're partnering with in us, which will also shape further the global strategy. You will shape things like strategies expansion with others, strategies for expansion with others for expansion. Like if several of you are working in the same city or the same province. By developing joint city initiatives, by building strong networks of churches that seek the welfare of the cities, welfare of cities, towns, and villages. It's one thing to build your own network. You're kind of becoming a network of networks. India is the classic example because you got 14 national languages and you got networks all over the place. Very, very difficult to pull them together into a movement. There's been some shallow movements that have started. That would be a prayer movement. I'm not saying prayer shallow, but that movements that. But getting it to the point where you can work strategically together, because you've got your own field, like Paul says, you've got your own sphere, and you've got your own expression, because even just different languages have different cultures with them when you move across India. But there is some commonality there that allows for strategy. And that's one of the things Michael will be showing you when we look at the global network chart tomorrow. And that's the next level of challenge with India as far as making a high impact. And then the basic overall strategic focus, because that's what the grand strategy does, is bring about strategic focus. A high level of shaping of emerging Christianity around the Acts complex apostolic network paradigm found in the way of Christ and the apostles. An emerging paradigm in each of the 9 civilizations. A few global city prototypes emerging and some diaspora. And all of our partners with a solid base in the paradigm. Strong apostolic team with leaders training at every level and experiencing solid, spontaneous expansion through grassroots leaders, churches, and families. That's what the grand strategy is designed to bring the focus on. So what Michael's going to do is when he's going to take us now into training systems, what was the term you used?
Strategy systems.
Master strategy systems. It's how do we build these into concrete strategies, and into concrete strategies in a way that we can work together at a civilization level, or work strategically at the six cities in India. And I think that's it. Oh, no. So the idea, again, with the civilizations is we go from grand strategy to civilization master strategies that we want to have influence with you on, and to partner master strategies, either GRTs or PRTs, that are well shaped and fit your cultural situation. That's it. Should we leave this on?
Yeah, leave that on for a little bit. Let's, I'm tempted to, what do you want to do, Jeff? Do you want to talk about this a little bit first? Or I'm tempted to take a question or two from them too.
Yeah, what I would do, because we don't know we talked about this a lot ahead, that part of it is if we do presentations, but you've got them in your hands, we don't have to do them completely, then our interaction helps back and forth like is going on in your head. And then if there's time for when you have questions or you have discussions at tables, stuff really begins to sink in, which is kind of why we're flying over this. But I think I would take yours, before we take a question,
Okay.
take yours, just that circle,
Okay.
because that really comes off the last piece here.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Yeah. Let's try that. Let's do that.
Because then you can back up into your...
Yeah, because the thing, you guys might not be, you've got to connect the dots of how Christ has a strategy for this age of which we all live in. He has a strategy. And so we have to have, so his Spirit is moving that forward, but our work in it is to follow that grand strategy. So let me share I'll share my screen now. I'm just going to sit here and share it and talk.
Because then that gives them the whole picture enough to go after any...
Yeah, so, and I'm not going to push it
Global
in.
strategy systems.
Global strategy systems.
that wasn't
So,
right.
let me just give you a few. Strategy, again, I've talked to, Jeff, I'm thinking about the last 20, 30 years. I've just talked to so many people in those years who say, we don't need a strategy. We don't need a strategy. So there's a little bit of almost at times I feel like we have to convince people that strategies are important. Because
that we're not getting in the way of the Spirit's job.
And we're not getting in the way of the Spirit. Yeah, because you could also, I've heard people say, well, man makes plans and God provides his steps. And so I don't need to make a strategy. So there's sometimes...
That's somewhere close to the proverb.
Yeah, well, maybe I intentionally messed it up because it's it's a cliche and not a rooted principle. But let's do just a little bit of that. Strategy describes a conclusion a leader reaches under conditions of scarcity, I can't even say that word, temporality, competition, and fluidity. In finding the way ahead, strategic leadership may be likened to traversing a tightrope. Just as an acrobat will fall if either too timid or too audacious, a leader is obliged to navigate with a narrow margin suspended between the relative uncertainties of the past and the ambiguities of the future. And as leaders who are trying to push a new paradigm to this world, an old paradigm that's new to us, push it forward, this is what we're doing. This is why we have to have a strategy, is it helps us stay focused on what we need to do. It's as shaky as a fiddler on the roof. I love that play, love it. And so that's my whole childhood right there. And that's what strategy is you're balancing your life. So I put that little analogy up there. Christ has a grand strategy, Ephesians 3, we already talked about that. Ordinary leaders seek to manage the immediate. Great leaders attempt to raise the world that they live in above and beyond to their visions. Strategy is specifically, what is it? It's creating the future, it's creating processes, it's creating conceptual frameworks, it's managing the present, it's implementing the vision, and it's work that you do over a long haul. Those are some brief definitions, because all this you have to understand in order to understand how to build your own master strategies. And that includes strategies for your network, but strategies for your own life as well. This was what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the global strategy system, there's a global grand strategy, there's global master strategy, there's civilization master strategies, and then there's network and church master strategies, and then your family and your individual person life strategies.
That takes you all the way down to parenting with a plan and life to the end.
And that takes you down all the way to how you fit in what God is doing in his strategy. You have to be able to line your own life up to what God is doing. And so I made this diagram, and I did not have any of the nice people. Nathan, what do we call you in Caroline? Nice people?
Yeah, look
People
at
who
Europe
can make
and,
this look nicer.
Look at Europe and North America. It looks like it's on an ocean or something.
Yeah, well, maybe they are. You got this is just trying, and it's out of focus here, but let's not look at the problems. Look at the concept, Jeff. This is a conceptual framework. You got the global grand strategy and then the global master strategy. And as we build out, Matthews, you were talking to me a day about an Indian master strategy for the civilization. Well, who makes that? The leaders that care about the whole civilization beyond their own networks help create that and say, this is what's going on. This is what's going on in our civilization. And this is why we need to do this together, we need to do this together. It doesn't mean you have to do everything together, but it does mean there has to be some coming together. And this is true for all the civilizations. If you, Jeff had a map, Samuel Huntington, here's another version of the same thing. We, as Jeff has said, we have mapped our calendars and our trips. I'm going to get real practical here for a minute. To go to each of these civilizations and pull the top leaders together from each of these civilizations together to talk about building master strategies for that civilization. Now, we've adjusted these a little bit based on the practicalities of who God has raised up from around the world.
You're talking about our partner leaders.
Yes.
Not just
yes.
leaders in the sense that we've never been for the idea of just getting a whole bunch of people together to go to the lowest common denominator, but our GRTs and our PRTs.
So let's go. So that's where you see Europe, North America, India, East African, Latin. All of you have, as partner leaders that are in a civilization, like Latin America. I showed just a quick picture of your civilization master strategy. But then you, individually, Don, you have your own strategy for Cuba and for those zones that we were talking about the other day. And that's perfect. That's exactly how it should be. And then down here, of course, is all families, and your life strategies fit into that. So I show an example at the end here of my own family and how my own family, this is my own wife and my own 3 kids as opposed to someone else's wife and someone else's kids, I guess. But legacy statement, milestones, and goals for the year. My wife loves the classic books, loves classical literature, and so I'm going to read XYZ books with her this year, 3 of them in particular. So your own life has to fit into your strategies. Here's some more examples out of my own, concerning my own health, my own family and marriage, my own farming, which is my tent making work, because I'm a farmer, as many of you know. It's how I make a lot of my income. What else do I want to show you? This is a piece of the Latin strategy. Okay, let's leave it. Let's do this, and Jeff, and let's talk about it. This is our master global strategy. I should put the word global in there. And so our grand strategy is just right beneath it to remember it. And then Jeff and I have particular callings and particular stewardships. Let me say this just right out of the gate. Some of Michael, I am not trying to be Jeff. Jeff is not trying to be me. A lot of times in the last 4 or 5 years, some of you're going to be transitioning your. Do I get into this?
Yeah. I would. My mind just went there.
Yeah, my mind went there too. Here's the thing: is a lot of teams, organizations, when they transition to a second generation, They think of it in terms of an institution, in terms of a CEO, in terms of a position. We are not transitioning positions from generation A to generation B, to the first to the second. Because most situations in that case, as soon as the second generation comes in, they get rid of the previous leader and they get rid of their whole leadership team. And they maybe will hire him as a consultant for 2 or 3 years. Hire him as a consultant so he can consult. And then if they get tired of him, then they'll just let him go after 6 months. And so that's the typical way that a Western institution framed will transition. And even pastors, or you get into the church world, it's that's and that is not what Paul is talking about. And so Jeff and I have worked extremely hard with our leaders. I see some of the leaders in the back. Some of our leaders, in order to figure out, what is your life work? What is Jeff's life work? What is Jeff called to do? What am I called to do? I am not called to be Jeff. Jeff is not called to be me. And that's a bit of why you see us being like we are, is because we are confident in what God's given us to do. And we're helping each other fulfill each of those life works, but we have our own life works. But they're all connected to the master and global strategy, which is connected to Christ's grand strategy, which gives you an immense amount of confidence. Does that make sense? This is when Paul said to Timothy in 1st and 2nd Timothy, he was not passing on a simple discipleship and teach this to others, 2 Timothy 2:2. It's not a simple discipleship. One does one and one does one. There is a role that Paul had amongst the network of churches that is a tradition that should be passed on from generation to generation. If you look at the rise of network Christianity, in the beginning of that book, what's that quote? It's something about how the last 500 years has been ruled by administrators, and yet what God is raising up now is entrepreneurial type networks of churches, which many people call apostolic. Mm-hmm. And that's hinting, it's not a direct hit, but it's hinting at there's a role that's given to get this way of Christ and his apostles back into the world, and it takes apostolic leaders who are pushing against the edges of the old paradigm and introducing a new paradigm. There's a role for those people in the world. That's the essence of what they're saying.
And one of the reasons, we talked about this specifically ahead of time, that this is what we do regularly. It's how we do our Sunday mornings, for example. But the reason why we don't hesitate in talking back and forth about our roles, or it's not because we're self-absorbed. We've got 18 networks, big networks in India, 60 total. Another big place, we have a lot like that. How's that? But then there are like 40 countries, or about half of you are represented here. Most of the networks, many of the leaders are my age. And there's no real strategy in place for the next generation. Yeah. And so we feel like by 2 Timothy, by the apostolic authority of 1st, 2nd Corinthians, some of the stuff we've really worked on, plus just working together for a 4-year period after positional leadership change, which needs to take place, just like Michael's farm. They have one of the most successful farms in the state, and his dad built that, loaned some money to Michael. He built a solid big thing too, and now, even though his father's his father, operations are run by Michael. But the whole thing is together. And around you, a number of you have organizations, that have had Western ties and Western money and structures. And if there's any link at all, but even if there isn't any link, just like around the world, most pastors are not trained in counseling, there's almost no real thought, biblical thought, about one generation to the next generation. and almost all of you have movements with somebody my age, and I know most of you don't have a good strategy, maybe an administrative strategy, but haven't really built the kind of thing, in a Paul-Timothy relationship. So we're not actually stumbling in to some conversation like this. It's fun, and it's genuine, but there's intentionality to it, because it's going to be the number one issue the next 5 years that a lot of you are going to face.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got clear over there.
Well, I do.
I guess it relates to this.
It's a it's a pressing issue for handfuls of you in the audience right here. I can see it, and I have a burden for you to carry the stewardship forward. That I had a leader from a organization that said to me 4 years ago when Jeff and the elders and the church said, this is the role that you need to play, this is the position as far as title is concerned. But then they called me soon after that and they said, well, XYZ needs to happen. And I said, well, I don't think so, because the people I've lived with, the elders who know me really, who I see every week, who are my fathers, and Jeff, who has mentored me for 2 decades, the statement I made is they continue to be my father until they die. All of them are my family. I believe 1 Timothy 3. I believe it to be true. I believe that the church is actually a family, and actually more important than, I'm not trying to put a division between you and your family, but I'm saying it is God's family. Your priorities in your life are your family, is your church family. And I believe that to be true. And so I said to them, my Jeff and my leaders will, and remember, I'm the positional leader at this moment, and they're saying, we'll give you all sorts of things, but you got to get rid of your dads. You got to get rid of these people. And I said, they'll never stop being my father. I will, in one regard, I will never stop being a Timothy until they're dead, because I believe in 1 Timothy 3. And they were angry. They got really angry. But that's I remember saying to him, well, why would I ever say to my own father that it would be crazy for me to say to my own father that, hey, turns out I'm big guy in charge now, you're not my dad. I mean, that just defies all sorts of respect and social structure and an actual understanding that God actually had me born later than them. I mean, and so I think my story, Jeff, all it is just an example, a real life example that had a whole bunch of emotion in it and a whole bunch of struggle in it, because there was a whole bunch of money tied to it that we couldn't get and couldn't have as a result of me saying, my father ceases to be my father when he dies.
We stumbled off into that territory because you were starting to explain those.
Yeah, my
those
stewardship,
two.
my calling. That's again. This is Timothy and Paul. They didn't just come up with it on a whim. It was proven and talked about with everyone else. So that we have made this public for years and debated it. But my apostolic stewardship is to lead leaders in the TWCA, in the way of Christ and His apostles, to build simple churches that are part of complex apostolic networks, everything patterned after Acts. Jeff, his stewardship, apostolic stewardship, is to shape the emerging Christendom by shaping the global Pauls, creating foundational paradigm tools. That helps us understand. Now, obviously, it's more complex than that. But in your own, I have this vision that at some point I can go around the world and I just ask you, what is your life work? And you can just tell me. Off the tip of your tongue. You can tell me. And integrate it all the way from the outside circle all the way into the core of Christ's grand strategy and see a direct link to what Christ is doing. these are the 7 core master strategy things that we are doing: expanding, rooting, building alternative recognition system. We'll talk about that. Creating paradigm resources. That is the global dialogue paper that you just saw. The white papers Jeff's going to do on Friday. All those things are the paradigm resources. Begin a North American Church Planting Network. Build benefactors. Let me mention that real briefly, Jeff, and then let's take some questions. We do have a focus on, where is it? On the third curve. We've been debating this for a season ourselves, but we have got a lot of work globally to do on the third curve. And third curve is about funding spontaneous expansion, funding apostolic teams, funding networks and networks, funding bivocationals, being tent makers, stirring up businesses, being entrepreneurs. A lot of things in that. But India. We've been in all across. What was it, a year and a half ago? We took a collection. We took a collection for the Build Global Apostolic Team to move out. Have all of you guys investing in this global movement and helping us move amongst the, I think it's more than 50 countries that are using our resources. So that's part of the third curve, and we hadn't done that before in that sense, but we are moving up that third curve, and so a lot of the next years you're going to see a lot more focus, especially on the second and third curve, but this slide I'm making a note of that third curve.
Finish the last global objective, though. I think there was...
Up here?
Yeah, what? Yeah,
equip and build our shepherding and counseling system across all of our churches, which we will talk about that, but that's actually going to become a global tool. We are taking all of our senior elders right now and all their wives through a shepherding and counseling, because just like in all our unique specialities for missions, the church doesn't need to do it. That's what you got missionaries and parachurches for. But training them, and you don't need, the Bible colleges and seminaries do that. The church doesn't need to do that. And guess what? The shepherding, counseling, that's not for us. We ain't trained in that, bro. We ain't trained in that. We can't do that. That's what the professional counselors are for. You just send them to a professional counselor. We just do our Sunday morning thing. We don't need to do that. And so the church has to, that's all fragmentation. And the church ends up not driving the bus, and the church is Christ's grand strategy. So the church has to, and I'm not saying that, there's things I am saying in that, and there's things I'm not saying in that. But we are equipping our leaders to be shepherds, to be counselors, to take, because all counseling ultimately is all about, my goodness, this just keeps going, don't I? All counseling is all about their maturation in the gospel of Jesus Christ, because the gospel of Jesus Christ is transformative to everyone's life. And so if we lose sight of that, we need help. There's other specialities that people can help with, and that all their tools that we can help with, they can help us as leaders. But we are responsible for their development in the faith and to present them mature before Christ, no matter what it is. So
we're producing a tool that'll be just in the life development series, as that thing unfolds, Life to the End, Parenting with a Plan, the SEMAs, it'll be shepherd counseling. And that'll be baited in our hands, because we're halfway through this April. We finish it with the senior elders, and then that becomes a tool you can infuse into it to build a well-trained eldership that know how to shepherd and counsel.
Yeah, and we're not talking. Yeah.
So, and it's interesting that those two have Ames Des Moines City Church after it, because we have to practice stuff thoroughly besides the research to get it to come out.
We are pushing it here. We are pushing it here, figuring it out, pushing it out, living it out in real life for years, and then we push it out. Our seventh one is the third generation, which again we said 1945 to 1960. 1945 to 1970 is first generation. 1970 to 1995 is the second generation. 1995 to 2015 is the third generation. And so we've intentionally put effort into the third generation because we have to start now for my death. So that starts now.
How many of you third generation guys there got your portfolio with you?
Oh, get wrecked. Only one? Oh, two. Two. There you go. James, what do you... take the microphone. Give him the microphone. Mike. Another third-gen guy can go get the microphone for the other third-gen guy. Stand up. What do you have in there, James? Stand up. Oh, boy. Isaac, why don't you go then? No, I'm just teasing, James. James, I'm teasing. Oh, go ahead.
Most of my stuff's digital, but we have these, and we'll print stuff off and bring them full of stuff that we're working on for first principles or for these kind of papers and taking notes on these kind of events. We fill this stuff. Isaac's got a way better example. I'll let him show his.
Yeah, Isaac, hold yours up. What do you got in it?
For mine, I've got 2 First Principles books. We're starting another one next week. I've got the 6th encyclical, Shepherding and Counseling, because I've been reading that, taking notes on it. And I've got a yellow notepad here with notes from different studies I'm going through.
Great. And let's push pause on that. So that's third gen. That's a strategic focus of, and what some of you are going to see now, let's transition to something else, Jeff. We're going to go to each of these civilizations that you see in this map. Our calendar is scheduled for that. And so we'll bring, in India, it's going to be in November. Part of what we want to do is build master strategies together with you, all the partner leaders.
On the ground together.
On the ground together, face to face. The other thing we want to do is have celebrations together, celebration banquets. Not graduations, there's a difference, but celebration banquets. We want to have a banquet feast. We want to have a mini glimpse of heaven. You know, like when we get together with Christ, the first thing we're going to do is have a banquet feast. There's going to be all sorts of food.
Illustrating progress. Right?
Yeah, and we want to celebrate progress, and so it needs to be hosted by you. So we're working some of that out with you, and on those. So it's gonna. How much do I want to explain of that? I don't think I want to explain any more than that. We're gonna have celebration banquets, and we're gonna spend a couple days talking about strategy and building a strategy for the whole civilization. That way. Because the piece about strategy is it gives people clear roles. Part of what's happening is you like the idea. Some of you I know you like the ideas, but you're like, I don't know what to do beyond my own situation. I don't know what to do. You know, I'm not being resistant. I'm just saying I don't know what to do. And so that's a piece of what we hope to bring some more clarity to from these. But some of our third gen are going to be with us in some of these cases. And what would be great is if some of the Indians go with us and meet us in Latin America when we have the Latin American one and the European one. And some European ones are at the Latin one and at the Indian one.
And another big country.
And another big country, too.
Hey, we just got 20 minutes for questions.
So, what are you thinking about all this? Let's get Elliot, you got a microphone? Where is it? Samuel?
See, if we had time in our system, we would take about 20 minutes now, and you'd discuss this in your tables. And then you'd give us feedback, from what you were discussing in your tables, and then that would be embedded, the questions. But
Yep.
There's not time for that all week.
John?
Thank you. Is it on? Test. Going back to the paradigm curves, you said you were teaching on that to shed light on paradigm change or paradigm issues. But you also said in the presentation that paradigms, the different paradigms cannot communicate with each other, and that translation is always imperfect. Not to mention that you've decided not to focus on church renewal. But so should we?
We haven't ruled out church renewal. It's just not in the top 80% of what we're doing.
Okay.
Because we still have systems going on all over in renewal.
Thank you. Good clarification. So should we be paradigm evangelists or not? And if we're not supposed to translate for people in the waning Christian paradigm, what are we supposed to do with all of this in relation to the people who are entrenched in the waning paradigm? Was that too long?
No, but it misses the point. That's not what either one of us are saying. What we're saying is, if you like, some people are saying, so I hear this all the time in one of our big country places. Jesus, is so frustrating that we can't talk. So you're saying 1,700 years of the church is worthless. You know, you're not saying that, but that's how. If you keep going that direction, that's how it goes. And obviously, we're using resources all across, that 1,700 years. And we're committed to renewal. Like, one of our strategies is in several of the civilizations, there's seminaries that is where a lot of the knowledge base is. And so when we build a partnership with the seminary, we say, go ahead and keep doing what you're doing, for residential, because you can't just stop it. But we'll work alongside, we won't disturb it. We'll work alongside and help you build a resource center so that it slides into, the next century. But what Michael's saying and what Kuhn is dealing with on incommensurable, you can't take systematic theology truths and use terms from a biblical theology framework and another time. You can't take and say that this term is commensurate with this term, because like discipleship, you almost never hear me use the word discipleship. Most of you still use the word discipleship, but I can't use it, because if you really know what goes off in a person's head when they hear discipleship, if they have any experience at all, it's a Western individualistic model, that is rooted in the Gospels, isn't rooted in the church and Christ's strategy. So in their head is a carrier, of that term. And you can use it if you use it the right way out of Romans, out of Matthew 28. But if you use discipleship as a term, or it's just modern day, you can take just a whole number of terms. And so what we're saying is we learn from the past and we use them, and we can communicate, but we can't communicate the new paradigm with their words and expect that they're not going to translate it into what it means to them. So incommensurate means, oh yeah, you draw on it, but we're building something fundamentally different as a result. And the terminology, you can't have the true dialogue with a previous paradigm by you taking their words and explaining what's new. It won't happen. It's paradigm paralysis. That's really the essence of what we're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you recommend regarding that task of translating the
Okay, I see
emerging
where you're going,
paradigm
yeah.
with
Those
who are part of the waning paradigm?
Here's what we're really saying. We can offer, because in that circle, the early majority, because we have market share across the global south, the early majority of people come up from the old paradigm and say they're interested in a peace, and we're interested in helping them understand the peace and helping them understand the paradigm. But the reality is, if they're entrenched in the other paradigm, they will not change by being convinced. They will change only when they see new models emerging that are successful. I've seen that. I've spent half my life trying to convince people in another paradigm and huge churches in the U.S. And sure enough, they got a piece of it or two, and they're better for it, but they're not going to They're not going to rebuild, you know, and maybe a couple of them jump up and rebuild. Great. But what I'm saying is that we have to accept the reality that we are in a post-Christian West, and it's not going to hear this stuff and all of a sudden come alive. It's not going to happen. At least my experience is that.
Yeah, I think, Sean, I know where you're headed a little bit too, because you're reflecting from your own situation on what to do with your life, and what we're talking about is that you have to start from a global perspective of what's happening.
Yeah. And we're not trying to tell people.
We're not
not
trying to
do
tell
that.
you what you can and can't do in your own life work and in your own field, but we are telling you to be aware of what's happening around the whole world. We're giving you an apostolic view of what's happening. That's what's happening around the world. You have to make choices along with the leaders around you about how you work inside of that and how you spend your days. We have put less emphasis stateside on renewal. It's still there. We have other, we're still trying to partner. We have people on our team that are focused on still doing that. But we're also focused on a third generation of churches in North America that look and feel like the way of Christ and his apostles. And that's what Randy is really looking. Who else? Steve or Javier? Steve, Javier is pointing towards Steve. Thank you, Javier.
I'd like to put the two talks together. So you've got the S-shaped curves, and then we have the global trends in Christianity, or we've got the 9 civilizations. Do we have any data mapping the progress of the civilizations to where the dots are on their adoption stages that show actually and demonstrate, well, look, the further along the adoption process they go, the greater the progress is of the gospel in their civilization?
From our networks, or
Oh, no,
you're talking
I
about
just meant...
a research.
Yeah, because, I mean, we've got, a lot of data that I've seen is more anecdotal than it is actually statistical or, measuring things. I know these things are difficult to measure. I didn't know if there was any resources or if anybody's done any of that, the statistical mapping that says, wow, the further along in this paradigm you adopt, the greater fruit you're bearing. Because, there's massive church planting explosions happening in the world that are not following the last 1,700 years of Western models. So I was wondering if they had any data to support what that looks like as it's unfolding.
Well, we have huge data when the model's wrong, like in India, where a combination of saturation church planting followed up by the second movement of CPM and backed up by DMM, we can demonstrate 70% attrition rate in most movements, without the complete picture on it. So, because the first dot in saturation church planting, which led to, probably 200,000-300,000 churches, planted in a decade across the north. The first dot, without the problems being solved of apostolic teams and network structuring and so on, and it's flat and it's just at the base, I can make a case on the ground for 30 years that it's about 70% attrition.
That's the thing you have to, when you look at these stats and you look at evangelism efforts, there's a lot of big organizations out of the West that do, whatever the broad group of evangelism efforts. What you don't have statistics on is how many are, like Jeff said, we have the results that are negative, meaning the attrition that happens. We get the stats of how many have come to Christ, but all 27 letters were written to establish them in that gospel and its teachings. And that's a long haul thing. That's how do you measure establishment? How do you measure rooting? And yet the whole New Testament authors are primarily concerned about that they won't go back to their old paradigm, Judaism, and that they won't fall away from the faith. There's a piece of, maybe you're not asking this, Steve, but there's a piece too of, I've wanted to take, and I've started to do it just a little bit in my own journeys and travels, but when you travel to a particular place like India, when I travel around, you can kind of see where people are on the three curves, where they are collectively as a one conversation. You can kind of see where it is. A lot of people in the last 5 years have moved from the first curve into the second curve and start thinking about second curve stuff. Very few are on the third curve. I have a few examples in the room, a few of you that are hopped over into the third curve. But as you mature in the first curve, you kind of drop into the second curve because you realize, I got to do. And that's why the curves are so helpful. But every civilization's at different spots pragmatically on those curves. And that you can kind of get a view of that when you travel as much as we do and you talk to as many as we do. You can kind of you get the sense of that. So I can't give it to you statistically, like Patrick Johnson and all these guys here, but we can give it to you in that form, I guess.
I've got another illustration quick, though, and that is that when we were in South Korea last year, I was there 3 days early, and then Michael joined for our official. And so they had me meet with presidents of 3 different seminaries, the main ones. And we found out that there's 100 seminaries in Korea, in Seoul, 100 in Seoul. And they're all in decline. A majority of them won't exist by estimate in just a handful of the next years. And the 2 top ones were declining except for one, which was kind of growth was actually an assimilation, kind of situation. So on the curve, you get to a particular point where if you don't start the next curve and are solving it, once you get the majority, then you go over and start going down, as a result. So there's a lot of research available generally in that area, but we're seeing exactly the pattern that I predicted in the papers, and of course was under Ted Ward's, tutoring and help, that almost to the year that we're seeing the exponential decline down.
Okay. Anyone else? Let's take another one. Over here, Sony.
While you spoke about the paradigms, and you said about 2 types of Christendoms, and you said one is, in one way you look at it, I'm assuming you're talking about the Western Christendom, which is more traditional, and the other one you said is all of Christianity everywhere. That's one, you use Christendom in 2 ways. The other thing is even about paradigms, you said about a waning paradigm, and the other is a new paradigm that's coming up. I don't know how much of a waning paradigm is there so much influenced in a country like India, because we are not as much Western as we are Global South, which is a new paradigm raising up. So we don't have too much of a problem of a kind of a waning paradigm, but like you said, the other thing that you said is sometimes we are already in the paradigm, we don't realize that we are in the paradigm. Now what I'm trying to say is, I think that India is already in that new paradigm to some extent, because we don't have the baggage of the old West so much, as probably there are issues, but not as much as it's in the West. We do have some baggage. So where do we start the shaping process of a paradigm that's already there? How do we kind of, is it that you start with everybody taking on first principles as an example? Every church does first principles so that they all set into that? Or should we start shaping the leadership at a top level? Where do we start working on a country like India at a top level? Because we have to look at it as a civilizational strategy, as a national strategy we're looking at. Should we work at the top level, or should we work from the grassroots level, building it up, and so that the paradigm is already kind of started off? Now, how do we give shape to this whole thing?
Both simultaneously.
Both simultaneously? Okay.
Yeah, both simultaneously. See, how in the world if you start from the bottom up, how in the world are you going to sustain 10,000 churches? at waiting till you get to the top so you can build an apostolic team that's key to sustainability. And so how in the world are you going to not respond to the movement of the Spirit at the grassroots? That's got to wait until you get the top leaders trained. They both have to happen simultaneously.
Yeah, and I would say too, it depends at which level you're talking about influence in India. And in one sense, in the macro sense, you look across the whole globe, India does not have as much Western influence as the West carries in it. That is true in your statement, but don't underestimate how much influence the West has in the Indian networks. When I see a lot of it, there's a lot of Western influence. And take the 70-some% attrition that happens. I mean, you see tens of thousands and thousands of churches, I mean, even in your own network. There's 25 years ago, there's 30,000 churches, and years later, where are they? Because if we're not focused on establishing them, then they fall away. So at a more civilization level, don't underestimate the power of a paradigm. Don't underestimate the power of money, and don't underestimate the power of Western Christianity. What?
Yeah. Let me nuance my answer a little bit. You got to do both simultaneously, but both simultaneously may mean that type 3 leaders need to be trained enough to handle these, and type 5 later, as far as some movements. But you take a place like India, and you don't have some of your big movements training type 5 and 3s that can go down while the ones are coming up, then just from what Michael's saying, your lunch is going to be eaten because of the old paradigm and its money, and coming in and educating the top ones the wrong way, which will screw it up. So you got to have a simple rule may be that in your big ones based in the city, you better be training that top level 5, you know. But as you move out into the towns and villages, your focus might be on type 3 leaders that can train the 1s and 2s while you're bringing the ones up. That's why complex network demands a very sophisticated strategy.
Okay, because I wanted to know how to make a grand strategy for the nation itself. If you're making, should we hit it at the type 3, type 5, or where should we concentrate more on?
Well,
Yeah, a movement like yours, you better have type 1, type 3, and type 5.
Yeah.
And if your 3s can't handle it at first and start complaining and say stuff's too hard, and the 1s stay too hard, that's because they're not being trained properly. You know, so you got to do all of them.
Yeah, it's a matter of,
Trained
You have to have all-
trained in the resources properly.
When I think about the Indian civilization as a whole, you're going to have, all across the whole civilization, you have to have each of those levels going on. You have to.
416.
Okay, one more and then, oh boy, one more or not. It is 4:15, 4:16. We said we'd be done at 4:15, so you know what,
We gotta be-
Neelish, you can grab us afterwards, but I think we need to cut it off.
Yeah, we
That's it. No, let me try to wrap a rope around this. We hope we've given you a view of what is happening as far as paradigms, in a way that you can understand what's happening for paradigms, give you a direction for the future and see yourself, and then the strategies, a grand strategy and master strategies that ultimately your own strategy, your own life work can fit in and all be part of what Christ is doing in our world. So we will see you tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Be here just a little bit early. We're going to sing together some songs that were written by our churches in the Way of Christ and His Apostles. See you tomorrow.